Good morning. Great to see you today. Are you feeling refreshed from your extra hour of sleep? All right, Barry is. Yeah, it's good. It's good to get an hour back. The problem is the evening time when you end up staying up later than you normally would. So it's a trade-off there. If you want to turn your copy of God's Word to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, that's where we're going to take our text this morning. And people who know me well know that I'm a very competitive person. If I play a game, I play to win. I've been competitive my whole life. I think I take that after my mom. My mom is 87 years old, but if you're playing a game with my mom, she plays to win. She's very competitive. Several months ago, Jennifer and I, we hosted a neighborhood cornhole tournament. We invited neighbors over, couples, to play against us. And, I have to admit the competition was not that great, but Jennifer and I won every game. That's just like I like it, just exactly the way I like it. But we won. What, Jimmy? Are you challenging me, Jimmy? I thought you were going to challenge me to a cornhole match. You don't. Oh, okay. All right. So that's good. I like that. So anyway, we won every game. And so I was talking to my mom sometime after that, and I told her about the cornhole tournament we had in our neighborhood. And she said, well, you and I are competitive people, and if other people can't win, we're happy to take it upon ourselves to do so. So you can see exactly where I got my competitive nature. But the challenge for me is I have to distinguish between enjoying winning and needing to win. And that's what I struggle with because I'm so competitive. It's not just that I like to win. It's that I need to win. Now, some of you are competitive too, so you don't have to cast a stone at me. Some of you are very competitive as well. And the challenge for us is when winning becomes part of our self-esteem, when it becomes the basis of our significance. And I admit, I have struggled with that. So it doesn't matter if it's a game of cornhole or dominoes or if it's an athletic event or if you're running a business or in my case, professionally leading a sales team. A lot of what the world describes as success is driven by an unhealthy motivation, the need to win. Now, I want to make sure I kind of put this peg down here and say it's not necessarily bad to be competitive, and it's what we choose to do with our competitive nature. And I think you're going to see this with the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, the text we're going to look at. Paul was competitive too. It's just he channeled his efforts in the right direction. He was competitive to win the souls of other people so they could join him on the journey that leads to heaven. So Paul's going to have something to say that's going to help us process and understand and manage that part of our personality if you happen to be wired like me, someone who's highly competitive and really feels the need to win. So let's look at 1 Corinthians 9. And someone please read 19 through 23.
Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like the Jews. Win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like under the law, though I myself am not under the law, as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I become like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law.
All right, thank you. So this morning, and if the last time we were together, if you recall, and I'd be shocked if you did, because it's hard to remember the things you hear yesterday, much less 2 weeks ago. But 2 weeks ago, when I was with you, we studied from 1 Corinthians from chapter 4. So we're going to study today from chapter 9, but just as a little bit of a backdrop, a quick springboard into chapter 9, Paul had said in chapter 8 of this letter to the Corinthians, he had given instruction there about meat that had been offered to idols. He was writing to the Corinthians. They had to deal with coming out of a very pagan culture. So he wrote about meat that was offered to idols. And Paul basically said there's nothing wrong with eating that, but if it causes your brother to stumble, you shouldn't eat it. So it really highlights the fact that you and I have freedom in Christ. We have freedom, lots of freedom. But we also need to understand that our love needs to supersede our liberty. Sometimes our liberty is going to be detrimental to those we're trying to influence for the cause of Christ. So we have to set that aside and let love take priority over liberty. And for those who might say to Paul, well, that's easy for you, Paul. You don't have to give up anything. Paul is saying here in chapter 9, I'm willing to give up my rights for the sake of the gospel. And I struggle with that too, okay? Jennifer's way better at this than I am. But if I am going to vote for a particular candidate for office, I'm going to wear the hat, I'm going to wear the shirt, I'm going to put a sign in my yard and a bumper sticker on my car, and I don't care what you think. And that's not necessarily a good thing, okay? Because it can be divisive. So my wife is very good at that. Be more like Jennifer, not like me, okay? in that way. She tries to reel me in. God bless her. She tries to reel me in. But that's a full-time job. So anyway, I can spot it because I got it when it comes to being a competitor. But I'm joking, but I'm really not joking. Because as Christians, we are free. But more than anything else, we are free to make sacrifices for the benefit of others and not for ourselves. Does that make sense? We have freedom. Paul says it all throughout the book of 1 Corinthians. He says, you've got the freedom. He says, all things are lawful unto me, but not all things are expedient. All things are lawful, but I will not be brought under the power of any. He said that earlier in 1 Corinthians. So this is what we're chatting about, discussing this morning. So all that backdrop leads us to 1 Corinthians 9:19. Look what Paul says there. He says, for though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all. So he's free. One version that I consulted, the International Standard Version, not a version I consult very often, but I like the way it says it there. It translates that phrase, I am free from all, as I am free from everyone else's expectations. Okay? So nobody could say to Paul, you're my slave. Paul was nobody's slave. And nobody could tell him what to do. But he's saying there's a deeper meaning than that. And part of our challenge in American culture in 2022 is almost everything we do in society is performance-based. You always have someone judging you based upon performance or outward appearance. I live it every single day in my professional role as a vice president of business development for a healthcare company. I'll see it every single day. Every month, the number moves up. What's required of us as a sales team, that number moves up. And every month, you're evaluated on how did you do relative to the budget we gave you, right? Every part of it is performance-based. If you fall short, you have to answer for it. If you exceed it, they celebrate for a minute, but guess what? The calendar flips to a new month, and here we go again. What have you done for me lately? Anybody else in here experience that work? That's the way it works. That's life. That's business. And so when we take that and we push that into the spiritual arena, we have to be careful, because in the eyes of God, the grace of God is not exclusively for you or for me. It's for everyone. And it's a free gift. And you and I did nothing based on our performance to earn it. Is that right? Grace is a free gift. So in our society, we see it all the time. If you make a lot of money, people consider you valuable and your opinion more important than other people. If you're very good at sports, then you're deified and you're elevated above other people. If you have a job with prestige, people will give you special treatment. But if you don't have that, then they may look at you a different way. It's a performance-based value system that we live in. It's just the reality of it. It's just that's life. However, and maybe I should put it this way, because often the Bible does, but grace. Okay? It's just like way back in the book of Genesis, when the world as they knew it back then had gone crazy, and people were doing whatever they wanted to do in the days of Noah. And the Bible says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of God. And this is a big deal for you and me. God assigns a value to us, not based on what you and I can do to deserve it, not based on performance indicators, but based upon the fact that He is the one who gives it to us. We don't give it to ourselves. So without grace, I may base my value, my significance, my self-esteem on how well I do, how well I perform as whatever my role is in whatever I'm doing. And the better I perform, the more praise I might get. But that's not the way it works in the eyes of God.
Yeah.
So yes, sir.
What did scripture say? Not as much flesh you mentioned,
Yeah, that's it. That was a verse. That could pop up at any time in our discussion this morning. Mitch alluded to Ephesians 2, I believe, 8 and 9. That's what we're alluding to there. For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. I think that's the context there. Grace is a gift. And it's not based upon our individual performance. And I'm thankful for that, aren't you? Because none of us can measure up. Even if we checked all the boxes in this life and thought we had jumped through every possible hoop to please God, without His grace and mercy, we're still not going to get to heaven. It's not possible.
well, addition, you know, with the problem with the Philippines. So then everything was with faith. I mean, everything was performed faith. Oh, you contributed this person. Good for you. Oh, well, you don't have much to give. Sorry, you just study enough.
Yeah, Mitch alluded to the Pharisees, and they were very performance-based. They had taken the law of Moses and had added lots of other clauses to it, lots of other requirements, additional things that Jesus said you put burdens on men's shoulders and you won't lift a finger to help them with it. So we have to be careful. You know, whatever it is, and kids have a lot of pressure these days on that kind of stuff as well. They can be judged based off of their grades or their, athletic talent or musical ability, or you go into adulthood, how much money you make, what kind of job you have, what kind of car you drive, what kind of house you live in, how much land you own, all these things that we can be evaluated on. And there's hundreds, maybe thousands of different ways you can compare yourself to others. I can compare myself to others. And Paul is saying here, you're missing the point of what it means to win in this life. Winning in this life looks differently than the world defines it, because that's a value system that won't hold up if all we're worrying about is what other people think of us. That's a dangerous way to live. Xander.
More of Him and less of us equal win.
There you go. That's a good way to put it. I would agree with that. Yep. And I think that's what Paul is saying. Paul, in his writings to the Philippians, he talked about how Jesus Christ emptied himself. Jesus Christ, is God. When he came to the planet, he was God wrapped in human flesh, but he emptied all of that out. He left it all so that he could come here, live among men and women, live a perfect life, suffer a horrible death so that you and I have an opportunity to go to heaven. Barry.
I think it's interesting that on there in 20, he says, and to the Jews I became as a Jew, to win Jews. I can remember the first time when I was probably in my late teens to early 20s, when I heard a preacher say, I am a sinner. And it truly, as for the first time, I went, what did he say? And he went on, I'm a sinner just like everyone else. And I don't know, it was just a thought that really caught me off guard. And I think it's the best way to approach most people who won't question stuff
Yeah, you're ahead of me in my notes there. That's good. Yeah, that's good stuff though. Yeah, this is exactly what we're talking about. There's a philosophy actually that I coach salespeople on, and it's when you get in, fit in, meaning if I'm going to go into an area where people are dressed casually, I'm not going in there in a three-piece suit, right? I want to look as much like them as possible so that we can have a connection. When I was in, I've alluded to it before in the time we spent together, when I spent some time in Russia teaching and preaching years ago, I had to be careful. The dollar goes a long way over there. So at the time I was there, $1 American dollar equaled about 30 Russian dollars. So you can see you can get a lot for your American money over there. So I was able to buy some really nice European clothes for very cheap. But I had to be careful that I didn't buy those clothes and then wear them around the folks who, many of them were poor, that I was reaching out to. I left those and just put those in my luggage to take home because I didn't want them thinking, oh, this guy thinks he's better than us. I'd be very careful about that because we are to assimilate and meet people where they are and make sure that we connect with people in a meaningful way. It's easy for us to feel good about ourselves, in other words, when we think, okay, well, I'm in a room and from a job standpoint, I may have the highest salary in here, so you may feel good about yourself. Well, what if Oprah Winfrey and Bill Gates walk in? Then what, right? You're going to feel like a nobody. Or if you evaluate yourself based upon your physical appearance, there's always going to be somebody who's better looking, prettier, better shape, except for you, Jimmy. Most people, though, they have to deal with that. So it's a roller coaster ride that we put ourselves on if we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people. And Paul is saying, I don't do that. Paul is saying, I am willing to get in where I fit in so that I can win souls for the cause of Jesus Christ. My whole point, our whole purpose on the planet is to assist as many people as possible in gaining heaven. I mean, what is the Great Commission after all? What does it say? Go into all the world. Preach, yep. Teach. Mark 16 says preach it. Matthew 28 says teach it. Go into all the world and make disciples. Teach people to teach people to teach people. That is our primary purpose for being on the planet. And I want to keep that front and center for you and for me, Mitch.
Well, to think you have overrepresented Christians who were baptized in Jesus' lives and said, I am of the Paul, I am interesting problem there that you can catch me in.
Right.
It's another example. I mean, we see in the religious world too, I mean, look at how we put Joel Osteen and all those guys on the pedestal. We're not all, you know what I mean? We put all these
Right. Yeah, Mitch is saying that the Corinthians had a problem earlier in the book, and I think I may have touched on it just a little bit as a springboard to our study last week, where they were saying, or 2 weeks ago, they were saying that I'm of Apollos, or I'm of Peter, or I'm of Jesus. They were claiming their allegiance based upon the wrong things, and how we can do that. We can elevate people for the wrong reasons. He mentioned a particular preacher. Preacher may be a little too generous. Joel Osteen. He's a great motivational speaker. That's what I'll say about him, and that's all I'll say. He's a great motivational speaker. No worries. So I'm not going to delve into that. But the only alternative, as you see there on the screen, the only alternative that's viable for you and me, if we're going to make a huge difference on the planet, is to live in the grace of God. Accept God's grace and realize I can't perform well enough on my own. I'm always going to fall short, whether I'm measuring myself to someone else or whether I'm comparing myself to what someone else does, what neighborhood they have. I mean, Jennifer and I on our drive up, we see all kinds of new construction going up, and man, we see some houses. We're like, wow, that's an incredible house. That's going to be like a mansion, I don't have to live in a place like that to be happy. If anything, we're looking to maybe downsize, get a smaller house, right? Make life more simple. But we're always going to fall short if we compare ourselves to other people. And religion, if you think about it, religion also can be performance-based. Well, how big is your church building? How many folks do you have attend? How many noses do you have that you're counting every day? Yeah, who's your preacher? Or, hey, what about the clothes that people wear? Are you wearing the finest suits and finest dresses? I mean, you see how I dress every time. This outfit probably costs $50, maybe, the whole thing. I don't care about that kind of stuff. I wear the same clothes for 10, 12 years. No exaggeration. Jennifer can vouch for that because she's like, are you still wearing this? Probably this probably needs to go in the trash. I had a lady one time ask me, I was teaching a class, and after the class was over, and I don't think she meant it in an offensive way at all, but she said, did you get that jacket from a flea market? And I had to laugh. That was funny. I didn't take it, personally. It didn't bother me. But yeah. Okay. So, and Mitch touched on this earlier with the general reference to Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9. For by grace are you saved through faith. Grace has nothing to do with you and me. What's the good working definition of grace? Unmerited favor. Not a single thing you and I did to earn it. We don't deserve it. God gave that as a gift out of his love for us. He gave it as a gift. So he's done that, and if I can root my value in the fact that the grace of God extends to even me, then I can root myself in the love of God and really connect to what it really means to be free. I don't have to compare myself to you to feel better about me or feel worse about me, because it can go either way. If you're comparing yourself to someone else and you think you're better, then you have an inflated self-esteem. If you compare yourself to someone else and you see that they're better, then you can really doubt your self-worth. We shouldn't engage in that. And this is what Paul is saying here. Paul is saying, because of the grace of God, I'm free from all that. I don't have to deal with that noise, all that drama. I don't have to deal with it all. And Paul says, 1 Corinthians 9:19. I like the version that Xander read there. It used the word that I was hoping would come up when that was read. He says, I have made myself a servant to all that I may win more of them. So now I'm back to, what are we playing to win? We are playing to win souls. That's what Paul is talking about. The word win here is not like winning a game or winning a prize or a trophy. The word win here is a financial term. It's the same term that was used back in Matthew 25. Remember the parable of the talents, where one servant was given 5, one was given 2, one was given 1. Well, the 2 who were given the larger amount, the 5 and the 2, they had received 5, had received 2, but when they came back to their master, they said, look, master, I have gained 5 more. I have gained 2 more. Same word. Some versions, the version you're looking at right now may say gain, that I may gain, right? Glenda says her version says gain. Same word. It's a financial term. We call it in business, I get asked this all the time from my boss, and he's probably just pushing down the message that he hears from his boss. Steve, what's the ROI? You know what that means? What is the return on the investment? That's it. And this is what Paul is saying. We get this in our day-to-day. If you're putting your money in the bank and it's earning, 2% interest, which I know is high, it's not earning that in a regular bank, but let's say it's 2%. But you have another bank that says, hey, we're running a special. If you move all your money to our bank by November the 30th, we're going to give you 3%. Well, you might make that move. Why? Because it's a better ROI. It's a better return on your investment, right? We do it all the time. If you're an investor, you do that. Well, Paul says the reason I'm willing to make myself a servant to everybody is because I want a better return. And the return he's talking about is being able to bring more people to Christ. If I do this much, I can bring some people. But if I really open up my boundaries, I can bring more people. And this is where, you and I need to dig deep and think about it. Define the purpose of the Christian life. We talked about that a moment ago. The point and the purpose of being on the planet is to teach people the gospel of Jesus Christ so that they can in turn teach other people. So that if you have any legacy at all, it's not about you. It's a legacy of the grace and the love of God that saved you so that you in turn can share that so that others can be saved. That's our point. That's why we're here. We learn very difficult lessons if we think that our purpose is to be happy and that our purpose is that God is just, his role is just to continually bless me, that he's like a cosmic vending machine. I put in my dollar, I press C4, and I get a package of M&Ms. He's just a cosmic vending machine that I can get from him what I want when I need. That's not God. And we're going to be hugely disappointed if we try to live our lives like that. Because what Paul's saying here really makes no sense in an earthly way. Why would I sacrifice my rights and my freedom if my Christian life is all about me? Paul says it's not about me. Paul says, I want to reach other people. I want to get a spiritual ROI, return on my investment, so that more people can come to Jesus Christ. So let's dig deeper, because Barry was way ahead of me on the thing. Not surprisingly, because Barry's a sharp guy. So 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Let's revisit 20 through 22. So Paul says there, to the Jews I became a Jew in order to win Jews. Well, wasn't Paul already a Jew? Yes, he was. We'll double back to that in a minute. Then he says, to those outside the law, speaking of whom? Gentiles. To those outside the law of Moses is what he's talking about, I became as one outside the law, that I might be able to win those outside the law. Then he says, to the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I had become all things to all people, that I might by all means save some. Well, what does he mean by that? I mean, does he mean that we're supposed to be spiritual chameleons? Well, in a way, but not in an immoral way. It's not like, well, yeah, I go to the bars and I get drunk because that's where the worldly people are. And if I'm going to reach the worldly people, I need to be just like them and go down to the bar and get drunk. No, that's not what you need to do. Because if you do that, then you've shown them nothing any different than what they're already doing. What's appealing about it? There's nothing different about you. You're just one of them. Why should they change to be like you if you're just already blending into the crowd, Barry?
He couldn't go to the Gentiles and start talking about the Mosaic laws and expect them to understand where he was coming from with Christ. I mean, he had to get where they were to get them where he wanted them to be.
All right, Barry, that does it. You're ahead of me again in my notes. Just come up and finish the class. Come on up. No, that's good. He's right. And this is exactly where we're going. Paul was a Jew. But he's talking about here how he relates to two different groups of people, especially the Jews and the Gentiles. Paul is saying, if I'm reaching out to those who are practicing Judaism, then I'm going to be careful not to do anything that offends them, that would turn them away from the gospel immediately. So what did Paul do on his missionary journeys? Where's the first place he went, every single city he visited? Every time. Why? Because that's where the Jews were. But I thought Paul was called to be a preacher to the Gentiles. He was. But this is that. This is exactly what Paul is further describing here based on his missionary journeys. He would go to the synagogue. He would keep the Sabbath. He may go into the temple and keep Jewish feasts. When he was with the Jews, he did everything possible so that he wouldn't offend them. He didn't want to offend the Jews. Why? So that he could win more of them. To the Jews, I became even more of a Jew. Even though he was a Christian, he didn't go in saying, hey, I'm not going to do that stuff anymore. You guys are dead wrong on that. The old law is gone, which it was. The old law's been nailed to the cross, which it had. That was not his approach. He didn't rub their face in it. Paul would, for the sake of the gospel, do some Jewish things. You with me? In Acts 16, there was a young man named Timothy, who had a Gentile father. His father was Greek. His mother was a Jew. Timothy had never been circumcised, although he was a teenager at this point. What did Paul do? Took him to be circumcised. Why? Was Timothy supposed to follow the old law? No. Why did he do it? Because Paul knew in their missionary journeys, when they got into cities like Derbe and Lystra, where all the Jews were and where he's going to go first to teach them, he knew that if he did not have Timothy circumcised, that was going to be a barrier for the gospel being spread. So he had him circumcised. Now, the flip side of that, Paul also had someone he mentored named Titus. Titus was a Gentile. Did he have Titus circumcised? Nope. Why? Wasn't necessary. Because their impact and their ministry was not going to be directly to Jews. You see how Paul did it? He was consistent. In Acts chapter 18, Paul had his head shorn, had his head shaved to keep a Nazirite vow. That's an old law thing. That's an Old Testament thing. I've read some commentators, and I'm not going to chase this rabbit this morning because it's not relevant to what we're talking about, but I'll just mention it. I've read some commentators who say that Paul sinned when he did that. I'm not here to comment on that one way or the other. Paul was a man. He was not Jesus Christ. Is it possible for Paul to have sinned? Absolutely. Did he sin in that case? I don't know. But the bottom line is, why did he shave his hair off and take the Nazirite vow and do something Jewish? Why? So he could reach more Jews. That's the point of it. And there were occasions that Paul would do those things to make sure he connected with those whom he had such a heart for, his fellow Jews, who in many cases had a hard heart towards the things of Jesus Christ. So he tried to reach them. Now, when Paul was with the Gentiles, as we read in verse 21, Paul says, when I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from the law so that I can bring them to Christ. So that's the old, where you get in, fit in. When Paul went to Athens in Acts 17, first place he went was synagogue. That's where he went. He reached out to the Jews. Second place he went, as we see chronicled there in Acts 17, was he went up to the Areopagus, where all the Greek philosophers were gathered and the followers of Greek philosophers. When he spoke to the Jewish people in the synagogue, as Barry said, he would use the law of Moses. He would use the Old Testament prophets to prove to the Jews who Jesus was. But try that with the Gentiles. They'd say, you're crazy. They had no point of reference for that. They weren't involved in that. So when Paul went to the Areopagus in Acts chapter 17, he didn't quote Scripture. He actually quoted the Greek philosophers, the pagan Greek philosophers. Why did he do that? So that he could show an emotional connection and bond with those Greeks so that he could lead them to Jesus Christ. And say, hey, I know what some of your own philosophers said. You see that right there in the Bible. You'll see a quote in the Bible that Paul used regarding a pagan philosopher. Sander.
It sounds like wherever he taught, the audience that he taught, he's trying, before he could teach, he had to have a rapport with that audience. Or he couldn't teach.
And the same is true for you and me. That's it. And that's why, we need to be careful. And it doesn't mean we compromise. I want to make sure we understand that. We're not talking about compromising. But we are talking about being careful. That yes, we are under the New Testament law. We follow Jesus Christ. But if I am going to reach out to, someone who's a Muslim, I'm not going to eat bacon in front of them. Because you're going to have an immediate barrier. I can have bacon in a different meal. Are you with me? And I've had friends and colleagues who are Muslim and wonderful people. And I'm not going to purposely do something to offend that person. Otherwise, I can't reach them with the gospel. I won't have the opportunity. I'm not going to do that. If I'm going to go reach the Amish, I'm not going to go in there in a Hawaiian shirt, okay? Because that doesn't appeal to their more simplistic way of life, right? Does it make sense? You're not going to put up an immediate red flag and barrier between you and the people you're trying to reach. And I'm speaking to me this morning. I need to get better at this. So we need to understand that ultimately, we're not here to just point out where everyone else is wrong and we are right. That's not what Paul did.
Well, when it comes to stuff like eating stuff like that, there's no wrong in it, there's no improper.
In what way?
In the eating, swimming, breathe, like women, there's really no wrong with eating.
The motive could be wrong, though. Yes, that's the point I was making with, if there are certain things in our diet that, we're able to eat whatever we want, within reason. Doesn't mean we should, but we have that freedom. But if we're in certain groups where they have dietary restrictions based upon their beliefs, we shouldn't rub their face in it by eating something that's outside of their scope and think we're going to be able to connect with them. I mentioned this, it's been a while back, because we've been blessed to come up here for about 6 months now, off and on, since April, to spend time with you and study, and it's been wonderful. And I mentioned to you one time in my traveling and speaking in a professional sense, I had spoken on a conference in New York where there were a lot of Jewish folks in attendance. And so I made sure, and it's a business presentation, but I always work in the Jesus worldview. And I'll use some New Testament verses and things like that. But I noticed in the audience there were a lot of Jewish folks. So I used in my presentation that day references from Jewish rabbis. And after the presentation, I was surrounded by Jewish folks who were very interested in having further conversation. Do you think they would have done that if all I had included was the New Testament? Not at all. But they wanted to talk, have you heard of Rabbi so-and-so? Which I hadn't. They know way more about rabbis than I don't. But it gave them an opportunity to educate me on some things. And we were able to build a connection and talk about winning souls. And that's what Paul is saying. I have become all things to all people that I might by all means save some. I do it for the sake of the gospel. That's why I did it. The same reason exists for you and me. I do it for the sake of the gospel. And people may accuse us of being wishy-washy or saying you don't have any convictions because I see you act this way in this group and this way over here. And I tell you, if you do that, that's actually consistent with New Testament teaching. You're not compromising Jesus Christ. Now, I'll make sure I make that very plain. We're not compromising Jesus Christ. But we do have to make sure we fit in with people and find that common ground. If I'm talking to an atheist, I'm not going to immediately start firing off how they're going to go to hell for their beliefs. Good luck with that. I'm not going to say, well, a fool has said in his heart there is no God, to an atheist. Why would you start there? You have to start with at least finding some common ground, at least, if nothing else, the love that humanity can have for one another. And Jennifer knows this because she and I are good friends with an atheist. And she loves us and we love her. And I never quote scriptures to her about how a fool has said in his heart there is no God. You can't start there. You have to exude and show the love of Jesus Christ consistently, and you hope and pray, and you do pray, that someone will eventually get over the emotional barrier that they have and come back to the way, what God has put in their heart from the very beginning, which is absolutely, we all have that void that only Jesus Christ can fill. Every human has it. So we have to give up our rights sometimes, and that's hard for us to do. But Paul makes it clear. Paul says it takes a lot of discipline for us to live this way. Now, we only have a few minutes left, and that works out great because this is something you and I have studied together before. The last 4 verses of 1 Corinthians 9, we studied that in a Bible class several months ago together, where we talked about how in Corinth, they used to have these Olympic-style games, the Isthmian Games, where they would compete in running events and in wrestling and boxing, and they would win a laurel wreath that was placed on their head that probably a week later was withered away, right? In our current Olympics and any type of world athletic events and games, they win medals, gold and silver and bronze. Jennifer and I, we direct a 5K race every year. We just had our 7th 5K race down in Murfreesboro that she and I are co-directors for. And we time the race. We have it professionally timed, and we award little gold, silver, and bronze medals in every age category. We also give for the overall male winner and the overall female winner a trophy. And so the competitors are out there striving for that. Paul says in verse 24 there, all the runners run, but only one wins. So he doesn't say, don't be competitive. He says, run so that you may obtain the prize. But what's our prize? Heaven. So it's not exclusive to us. We want to get to heaven, but we want as many people to win along with us. And sometimes when you're running, I'm a runner. I run usually 4 or 5 days a week. And the older I get, the better I used to be and the faster I used to be. But I still do it, okay? But some days are rough out there. Some days I feel horrible, like my back hurts, or I got a stomach ache, or, I'm just feeling horrible for whatever reason. And it's tough. Well, in the Christian race, when you see people struggling, we don't just run on by. We stop and help them. That's the beauty of the Christian journey. Someone pulls a hamstring, you stop and help them. Someone has a cramp and you check on them. That's the part where our competitive nature is to invest our competitive energy to get to heaven. This is what Paul is saying. This is why Paul became all things to all people, that he might by all means save some, because we're running a race. It's a Christian journey, and we want as many people to join us on the journey where the finish line is heaven. And it reminds me of the scripture from Hebrews 12, where Paul, most likely, is the writer of Hebrews, or Barnabas, one of those guys, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he said, wherefore we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. That's the journey we're on, folks. Run it with patience, help each other out, and God bless you.